welcome to the Islamic Finance Show, a program that aims to explore the development of Islamic finance and Islamic business. Some of the biggest issues surrounding the world of finance are the code of ethics, values and compliance. The subprime mortgage crisis back in 2008 brought this very much into the public domain. Islamic finance and halal businesses pride themselves on a foundation built on ethics. So today we'll investigate how ethics within the Islamic framework operate. So to get things underway, I'd like to introduce my guest for today, Tasneem Mayat, Senior Director at the Islamic Finance Council UK, an organisation focused on promoting and enhancing the global Islamic and ethical finance industry. And also joining me is Shiza Shah. She's the founder and CEO at UpEffect, a crowdfunding and support platform for companies dedicated to social impact. Ladies, welcome to the programme. It's really good to have you here. Tasneem, I'd like to start by asking a very fundamental question. What are the ethics underlying Islamic finance?
The ethics behind Islamic finance are all common to any strong value system or moral system of financial services. What differentiates them and what's the interesting aspect, and I believe the strength of Islamic finance in its true form, is the fact that if you look at the ethics in general, so you have normative ethics and you have two forms of ethics. One is driven by the duties. What are the right duties to complete, irrespective of the consequences? And the other part of normative ethics is based on what are the consequences of what you're doing. And where Islamic finance is very interesting is that it couples them both. It encompasses and includes both of those aspects into what it does in the spirit of the Maqasid al-Sharia. So whether it be whether it be integrity or accountability, the Islamic finance model is underpinned by the fact that we share risk. It is shared risk.
And that is very important to, in a retail aspect to consumers, where the risk is shared by the financial institution and the consumer who may be buying a product or service, say, from an Islamic bank.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And Shiza, you run a business which has ethical sort of sewn through it. Tell me more about ethical in terms of halal business.
Yeah, sure. So in my opinion, and based on my understanding of the Islamic financial model, it's very much built on the basis that poverty should not thrive within that system, and there should be a fair distribution of wealth within society so that those at the lower end of the economy are always catered to within all models that we're building within that economy. And what we've done and what we're inspired by is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's own business dealings that always espoused honesty, integrity, fair trade, justice and ethics, the same concepts that Tasneem has just mentioned. And the idea around that is that we should be making people financially independent so that they can stand on their own feet, run businesses that provide for them, the economy and their family and friends. And that's really not what's happening within the financial system as we see. It's very much driven by debt. It's very much driven by the fact that investors are making most of the money from a lot of these transactions. And so what we've done is we've used crowdfunding as a means to ensure these founders have the skills and resources so that they can run their own ethical businesses.
What's interesting, as I mentioned at the top of the show in my introduction, is the US subprime mortgage collapse, which obviously not only devastated many people's lives, they lost their homes, they lost their livelihoods, but it also impacted globally. And, we had the global recession back in 2008. Now, it's been widely accepted that this mortgage collapse in the US resulted in a massive loss of trust, public trust in the financial sector. Now, do you think, of course this was back in 2008 and we are now 2019, Tasneem, do you think some of that trust has been restored, or is the financial sector having to work very hard on that?
Trust is still being rebuilt. We're still working on it post 10 years since that crisis. there are a lot of government and private agencies that are trying to build that cohesive system to create more frameworks, if you like, and principles and guidance and for banks to follow in order to rebuild that trust. But it's not over. There's still a long way to go. And this goes back to the fact that how are we addressing or filling the gap or building back confidence? It's one thing to reposition yourself as an organization in terms of your brand and how you portray yourself, but it's also another to make sure that as an organization, your entire system and process and operations are basically re-engineered to incorporate ethics into every single decision that's made.
And what's also interesting is, she's moving forward. We're living in an increasingly technological world. So this code of ethics is going to have to adapt itself as we progress because, the world is evolving into a more tech-savvy and tech-operating environment. So surely the ethics have to shift around that too.
Yeah, I mean, technology plays a huge role in the Islamic economy at this stage, and it should do so moving forward. I mean, I think generally speaking, ethics is new to the Islamic economy agenda, which is very unfortunate given that that's what Islamic economics is built on. It's built on the principle of social good, social responsibility, and prioritizing the values that put people above profits. And technology should play a role in enabling that. So innovation is actually quite important for us to see those advancements in the Islamic financial space. And we're seeing more and more entrepreneurs come forward with new ideas, especially in the London ecosystem. But again, if they're not prioritizing ethics, I think a lot of those solutions won't sustain themselves because generally speaking, the market in general, where if you look at consumers, they're demanding businesses to be more conscious, to prioritize all elements within a supply chain. They want brands to basically look at how people are treated, who are the makers of the product, are they being paid a living wage, what is the carbon footprint of these companies, what is the overall social environmental impact of these businesses.
However, do you think that's a given? And I've seen increasingly, people being more vocal about this in all markets, not conventional and the Islamic economy. However, do you think there's a disconnect between knowledge and the implementation of making sure your ethics are in place, or is it just a lack of will?
A lot of systems are reluctant to change. That's the case with most bigger organizations. When there's so much bureaucracy, when there's so much red tape, it's harder and more complex to make those changes and those shifts within the organization. But that's why it's going to be the new generation, it's going to be the new businesses, the new startups that are coming forward with those innovative solutions that are going to drive that change. So I think it's a combination of both. But I think organizations will need to actually make those changes eventually, because not only will they suffer in terms of market uptake, but their profitability will go down. They won't be seeing the same financial returns that they're seeing now purely because of the way the market is shifting. So yes, it shouldn't just be driven by financial needs, but for these organizations to actually survive and sustain themselves, I think they will eventually need to shift their practices so that they are more compliant on an ethical level.
Tasneem, going back to the 2008 financial crisis, I mean, at that time, as far as I can see it, there was a vacuum created for Islamic finance to enter with its ethical principles. Did it capitalize on that, or are we still not there yet?
So post the financial crisis created a gap for the entire financial industry to fill, if you like. And it was up to every institution, regardless whether it's conventional or Islamic, to reset. And one thing we should remember is that the financial crisis affected everyone, not just the conventional banks, also the Islamic. So that tells you that structurally there was a lot more similarity than difference. Whether Islamic banks could have filled that gap is the same, for me, the question is of whether conventional banks could have filled that gap, because the way they're both structured, I feel, is quite similar in comparison to what Islamic finance is in spirit and in principle. For example, it's short-termism. It's reporting to shareholders rather than stakeholders. So it's that entire design which is very much in common across both platforms. And the aesthetics of law, so just ticking the boxes versus the essence of why Islamic finance is Islamic finance.
So do you think financial institutions, Islamic, are opting for form over substance? Is that the approach? Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, yes, primarily the banking system has been driven by, I mean, like any conventional industry is driven by profit making.
Well, that's the raison d'etre of any business, any financial institution. It is to make profit. You can't hide, you can't escape that. However, it's the implementation of how you do your business, whether the ethics, you choose to put the ethics in place, which matters.
Yes, but it's also profit making from a long-term or short-term viewpoint. And that's something that business and industry generally has maneuvered towards when you have to start reporting, on the listed stock markets, annually, quarterly, etc. So everything becomes very much short-term driven profit rather than long-term driven profit, which aligns very much with, long-term prosperity for all.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with profit. Islam very much welcomes profitable business models, but profits that are made at the expense of society, at the expense of people. I mean, how much of Islamic money goes into fast fashion businesses that are exploiting underpaid garment workers, Muslim garment workers, women living in underprivileged environments, working in very unsafe environments, being exploited to all kinds of human rights abuses. Why is that? So I think you can't claim that, yes, we're a profitable business, therefore we're Sharia compliant. I think it has to be inclusive of human values. It has to be inclusive of environmental values, and it has to look at the overall impacts, the long-term prosperity, so that profit is aligned to the social impact of the business, and they go hand in hand, I think.
Now, talking about Sharia compliance, so with any financial system, whether it's conventional or Islamic, certain checks and balances have to be put in place for any product or service to come to market. So is the Sharia compliance element of Islamic finance up to scratch, Tasneem?
The Sharia compliant side, it is basically the law or the way to incorporate or implement the maqasid or the spirit and the values behind Islamic finance. And what's happened is that Sharia has superseded that, and it's become now something on its own, which is used as pure law to structure products. So it's all in the structuring of products rather than the intent and the output.
Well, there has been criticism around the structuring of products too. The critics say very loudly that Islamic finance is mimicking, the conventional finance in terms of their products. So is this, what is Islamic finance trying to do? Fit a square peg into a round hole? Is that how, we're moving forward? You talked about innovation earlier. Surely it's to innovate and to integrate these ethics and the religious principles of ethics and social impact and so on the way forward. Why is that not happening?
You are absolutely right. That's where it should go. And that's where, in fact, organizations like our own, the UK IFC, is working very hard to go back to the basic principles of what Islamic finance is and create awareness around that. Because that's also an area where a market is driven to change by its consumers, its clients, its investors. You'll see that even in the conventional marketplace.
But don't they need to be educated along the way? Because
absolutely, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and that's the part which is lacking, and which we encourage people to do more of, to create that awareness. There's a lot of there are a lot of people who think that the prosperity of human beings or human flourishing is defined in a specific way, which is very much focused on the human prosperity element. But really, human flourishing is dependent on the flourishing of our environment and our planet, just like Shiza was explaining. So it's really about creating that awareness and therefore driving the consumers, the investors, the younger generations who will influence the big, older, conventional institutions to change and to adapt that model.
And what are you doing at your organisation to showcase the ethics of Islamic finance?
So we feel that faith-based finance, be it Islamic or any other, is a very powerful force towards global ethical finance changes. Historically, you will have seen that all of the conscious, responsible investing and banking has been driven by faith-based groups globally. So if we go back to that, that can create tremendous change, which is what we really need if we're going to solve for the world's global problems. So we believe Islamic finance could contribute a lot more to the mainstream agenda and drive more mobilization of capital towards achieving people and planet's prosperity and in terms of global change, the UN SDGs, etc. So one of the things we're doing is we're going back and we've identified the values behind Islamic finance, and then we've identified the values behind other faith-based finance groups, such as Christian faith-based, and we found common values. And we created what we call the shared values framework to show and highlight the commonalities we have amongst different faith-based finance industries rather than the differences, so that we can incorporate that framework into potentially technology-driven solutions that can achieve more change.
Shiza, I'll bring you into the conversation here. This is a great endeavour. However, with the geopolitical situation being what it is globally, and with the rhetoric on Islam and Muslims being what it is currently, do you think that's could hinder that progress? Will non-Muslims really be interested in taking up more ethical, however labelled Islamic products and services?
I mean, truly compliant, Sharia-compliant products should be catered to the entire world. It should not be specific to Muslims anyway. Going back to your original point, where a lot of conventional products have been taken and adapted to the Islamic financial world, that's part of the problem, right? We're taking products that aren't actually working, because that's why we keep ending up in a financial crisis.
But is that because of cost issues or some other issues that are prohibiting that?
No, because they're purely looking at these models are financially successful. They're making the right levels of return. Therefore, they want to see the same level of wealth being generated in the Islamic economy, and they're replicating those models. And
so there's no incentive to be innovative then?
Traditionally, yes, but they're realizing it's not working. And that's why the uptake hasn't been as great as it should be. And that's why it's so important to go back to the roots of Islamic finance. And that's why it's so important to look at community building. It's looking at models like crowdfunding that are actually
share with me. Give me some, the background, your model, your business model, how it works.
Yeah, so we're a rewards-based crowdfunding platform. There's different types of crowdfunding. There's donation-based, there's equity-based. And what crowdfunding actually does, it recycles the money that exists within the economy back into businesses. So it actually validates the supply and demand that should exist on basically to stabilize the economy. So for instance, businesses that we work with we equip them with the skills and resources so that they can take their products to market and reach the right customers and sell their products to those customers and raise the seed capital from customers rather than from investors and giving up equity, or rather than going to banks and ending up paying huge kind of interest rates, or ending up in debt, which obviously is a vicious cycle. And that's what I think the Islamic economy has very much been built around, the Islamic banking model, which is very much built on lending and borrowing. And that's not what Islamic finance came to introduce. In fact, lending and borrowing is a charitable element of Islamic finance. People should be able to forgive loans that can't be paid back by the community. Those should be forgiven. And that's not being incorporated within those systems. And so we basically want to equip people with the financial independence so that they're building sustainable enterprises that are profitable and are giving back to the community through crowdfunding.
Okay, just very quickly, Tasneem, is that a part of the problem with the uptake of Islamic financial products and services? Because the mimicking is not quite there, the marketing around showcasing the ethics in Islamic finance doesn't seem to be there. Is that part of the problem?
Yes, absolutely. So banks, I think, the banking industry, in the Islamic banking industry, focuses on the product range, and it's all, for example, things like how they're termed or titled in these Arabic and Muslim connotations. They don't have to be. They could be easily understood by a larger community who have the same requirements.
It could be simply put forward.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And spending more time on focusing on how they're making a difference in society, how they're saving money, because some are actually saving consumers money in certain ways. They're being fairer. For example, if you pay back earlier than you were supposed to, you might not have the same penalty clauses, but they're not spending time highlighting those elements, rather.
Okay, Tasneem, forgive me for interrupting you. Thank you so much. Time has caught up with us, I'm afraid, but thank you for joining me today. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, we'll be exploring a different aspect of or issue related to Islamic finance as we progress through the series, so do tune in every week. Also, if you'd like to comment or share your thoughts and opinions on what we've discussed today, then tweet us at Islam Channel or contact us via Facebook on Islam Channel TV with the hashtag the Islamic Finance Show. We'd love to hear your thoughts and views. Join us next time when we'll examine the significance and the role of Sharia scholars. It will no doubt be a very interesting discussion. My thanks again to my guests and of course to you at home. See you next time.